Are you ready for a show that talks sports from the fans' point of view?
We've seen Michael Jordan score 37 points a game in his era. How many could he score in today's NBA?
There's not a player out there who I'd rather have than LeBron James.
Are you ready for a show that isn't afraid to challenge anyone when it comes to sports? If Adam Silver really wanted to fix tanking in the NBA, he would stop rewarding teams by giving them the best chance to win the draft lottery.
I mean, how many times will Roger Goodell drop the ball on handling domestic violence in the NFL?
Look, athletes have every right to talk politics, but if the fans stop tuning in, that's their right.
Then you're ready for Talk Back, a podcast where two fans debate the media narrative and discuss the world of sports as we see it.
Welcome to the show.
It's time for another edition of Talk Back. I am your producer and MC, Eric Nesbit, and with me is Justin Gay, your host and director of content. We've got a nice lineup here in segment one, talking about the NBA playoffs. The Nuggets are going to round two, giving us all top seeds in the second round, and then we'll react to some of those game ones in the second round, which needs to include a discussion about the referees. Do the players and the referees have a problem with one another that's going to overshadow what should be a good NBA playoffs in 2019? Then in segment two, Josh Rosen has been traded from the Arizona Cardinals. He heads over to the Miami Dolphins. We need to react to that, talk about what it means for both of those teams. Was it the right move? And we'll end the episode by going to the track and talking about the race at Talladega in the NASCAR Monster Energy Series. The race had some interesting storylines to talk about, one of which was the aero package. But there is something I need to rant about just for a moment as we close out the show. We'll be keeping it tight this week because Justin and I are doing a lot of traveling for work. We've got a lot going on, but we do want to get these talk-worthy topics out to you. Episode 245 coming at you after the break.
All right, we're back here on episode 245, kind of an emergency pod this week. Eric and I realized with our travel schedule and what shook out in the draft this weekend that we probably should get together early, try to talk about what went down on Friday night with the draft and catch up on what's going on with these NBA playoffs right now. So, Eric, let's take it back to the last game of round one between the San Antonio Spurs and the Denver Nuggets. This was an ugly basketball game that really got pretty good in the fourth quarter. A lot of back and forth. Spurs made a big run in this game. This was an 88-86 game. Jamal Murray hits a shot with less than 40 seconds on the clock. It pushes the lead to 90-86 Nuggets. DeMar DeRozan comes down. He misses a shot with about 27 seconds or so on the clock. Denver gets the rebound, so Spurs are down 4, and you would think anybody that's ever watched basketball at that point would do the math and go, okay, 27 seconds minus 24 seconds on the shot clock. That leaves 3 seconds and you're down 2 possessions. Spurs better foul. Well, Eric, they didn't foul. And a lot of excuses have come out of this game. But when the San Antonio Spurs have a coach who the media has donned basically a god that can do no wrong and can go into a press conference and literally make fun of them to their face, and they think it's amusing, his team fell flat on their face at the end of this game. When you saw the Spurs not foul immediately down 4, what were you thinking?
Exactly what you were thinking. I mean, we just came off of March Madness. We just came off of the NCAA men's basketball where you would see this thing all the time. A lot of the games end in a situation where you're going possession for possession. You've got to foul. You've got to hope they miss free throws, and then you go back and try to do your thing on the offensive side. If you do, you foul again, and it's back and forth for the last 30 to 60 seconds of the game. Even if you can't hear the coach, because one of the excuses, as you mentioned, there's some excuses that came out. One of the excuses was the crowd noise was so high that they couldn't hear the coach. Well, Justin, I mean, and no matter what level of basketball you've played, if you're in the NBA, presumably you've played a lot of basketball,
right?
You should just know as a player that the situation is something you can't overcome. If you let them bleed 24 seconds off the game clock, you shouldn't need a coach to tell you that. So I don't know what they did there, but they really let a whole season of work and really a good 7-game series go out the window by, either bad coaching or bad planning or just bad playmaking there in the last 30 seconds. It was really surprising, especially for a team like the Spurs. You would think that they would be well prepared for a situation like that, and they just didn't seem to be.
They had a J.R. Smith moment. Literally the entire 5 on the floor for the Spurs. I don't think they knew the score, Eric. There's no way that they would not have fouled. I don't want to put it all on Popovich because he's not on the floor and he is screaming to foul.
Well, he actually was almost on the floor at that point. I mean, he
actually was on the floor. He just didn't go out and commit the foul that I think he wanted to. But even at the 14-second mark, Patty Mills runs around Jokic on the screen, and all he has to do is jump up and grab it and foul it. Even there, you sort of save yourself. Spurs still had one timeout. They could have advanced the ball. They just messed this whole thing up. I just get frustrated. I said at the end of the show last week about I'm just sick of Popovich, and I'm sick of the fact that he sits in these press conferences and he doesn't want to answer questions and he demeans the media, and then he wants to get up and lecture on different political figures and how they treat people and how disrespectful they are and how it's not the culture of the country. And he's doing it himself. He's acting that out in the public all the time through the media. So I'm just tired of his act, and to sort of see his team crumble like that at the end of a game. It was kind of ironic and a little bit poetic that this is a guy that's known to be this coach that holds his players to this high standard, and he yells at everybody from this number 1 guy to the number 15 guy. And you have LaMarcus Aldridge on the floor, who's a 9-year veteran. DeMar DeRozan is out there. He's been a number of playoff series with the Toronto Raptors and now with the Spurs. Patty Mills is known as this gritty guy who's tough and smart and plays the game the right way. All 3 of those guys had an opportunity to foul on that play, and none of them did. It's just simple that at some point, Eric, even in the timeout under a minute, I think it was 58 seconds on the clock, there was a timeout by the Nuggets. The Spurs should have been running through end-of-game scenarios there. Okay, if they score and we don't score, like that stuff should be done in the huddle where those players absolutely know. So I do put it a little bit on the coaching that nobody on the coaching staff coached up that team to know under a minute to remind them, hey, this is a 2-point game. If they score here, we're down 2 possessions. We're going to have to foul. Somebody on that team, on that 5, should have known that they had to make a play to foul, and they didn't do it. And they cost the Spurs a chance. It almost reminded me of that game years ago, like LeBron's last game the first time in Cleveland when they were in Boston, and they all just kind of stood around. And you're like, what is happening on this team? And that's exactly what I felt like. Like, are they just done? Are they quitting? Or do they just simply not know the score because they're playing it out like they're down 1 possession and they're going to milk the clock and have 3 seconds to try to get a game-tying shot off? It was mind-boggling.
Yes, it certainly was. The one thing I'm happy about, though, because I'm right there with you, is the fact that the Nuggets move on. I think just from a second-round series and how it could be more exciting, I think the Nuggets are the more exciting team. And so I'm glad the Spurs are done. They've had a long run once again in these NBA playoffs. It's nice to see them out in the opening round and have the Nuggets just have some fresh blood in there, because you never know what's going to happen in this Western Conference. And we've seen a good game here in Game 1 as we start to react to some of those between the Warriors and the Rockets. And so we'll see what happens between the Nuggets and the Trailblazers, a series that will kick off here later tonight as we record on Monday night.
And to your point, I think that's going to be a great series because I think it's going to be a real chance again to see Jokic shine and Lillard shine. I just think those 2 guys are going to come out and they're going to be really hard to stop. When you look at the numbers Jokic put up versus the Spurs and the fact that the Trailblazers are going to have to throw Cantor at him, I think he's going to have another monster series. And then you flip it over to the Denver side. They have a lot of guards that they can throw at Lillard, but he's just playing at a different level right now, Eric. And I think he's going to have a monster series. So we got through a couple Game 1s this weekend. Before we get to where all the action was in that Rockets-Warriors game on Sunday afternoon, let me take you back to the Eastern Conference. What was the more surprising result for you? The way that Toronto manhandled Philly in Game 1, or the way that the Celtics went into Milwaukee and just wiped the floor with the Bucks?
Well, if I look at the games, both of them as a whole, I think what surprised me the most was actually the Celtics and the Bucks. The Bucks they were a powerhouse all year, and the Celtics, I mean, the seed that they were in wouldn't lead you to believe that they would go in and wipe the floor right away in Milwaukee against this Bucks team. I just didn't see that coming. And so it does scare you a little bit that I think what you've talked about all season long is wait till we get to the playoffs. Wait till we can set these rotations up a little bit differently. Wait till you have just a certain niche group of Celtics on the floor, Kyrie leading the way, and see what they can do. They're a scary team right now if they continue to play that way. That surprised me more than the Raptors getting off to a hot start. They beat Philly by 8 points in the first quarter, but then the second quarter, they only beat them by 1. And in the third and the fourth quarter, they only beat the Sixers by 2 points each. So 3 out of the 4 quarters, in other words, in that game were relatively close. The Raptors just came out hot at home, got a lead, and just kind of held on to it for the rest of the game. I'm not saying the Sixers looked good by any stretch. They certainly didn't look like a team that could come back in that game one once they gave up the lead, but at least it was encouraging to know that they didn't just get blown out the whole game. They really got blown out at the beginning and then just couldn't come back.
I'm right there with you. I thought the way that the Celtics came in and took care of the Bucks by the number that they did was pretty impressive from Boston's standpoint. Now, Milwaukee didn't shoot the ball well at all, and none of their players did. We talked last week on episode 244 that for the Bucks to be in this series and to win it, that Giannis was going to have to be huge. He was going to have to be 30, 35 plus points a game and be efficient at it. He was 7 for 21 in game one. And then you look at what Middleton did, what Bledsoe did, what Brook Lopez did. None of those guys shot the ball well. Kyrie, Tatum, Brown, those guys all played well. Hayward played well in that game. So this is not going to be an easy series for the Bucks. I think they'll shoot much better in game two. And even with the Sixers on right now in game two, they're basically taking it to Toronto. They're almost up 20 here as they get towards the end of the first half. So it's a completely different game like we talked about a few weeks ago when we got into round one and game one, trying not to overreact till these series start to play themselves out. And you can actually see these teams, see how the matchups are going to be game in, game out, and try to figure out the flow of them. Game one sometimes don't give you everything. So I'm not going to overreact yet till really I see the Bucks in game two. If that happens again in game two, they could be in big trouble, Eric, going back to Boston down 0-2. It's almost a situation like we talked about with Denver in round one, where they just didn't look very good in game one. And we said that it's a must win that they get game two just for the fact of keeping them in this series mentally. Bucks are the same way. They're a younger team, not a lot of playoff success, not a lot of playoff experience on this team. So they need to come out and play very well in game two and get that series back under control. But Eric, I want to get your take on what happened on Sunday. Game one against the most anticipated second-round matchup in maybe the history of basketball at this point, the way this sucker's being hyped up, and that's the Rockets and the Warriors series. Game one was one we really thought the Rockets had a chance to go into Oracle and get a win versus Golden State. Golden State coming off of a 6-game series versus the Clippers. The Rockets have been sitting at home, resting and waiting for Golden State. But this game, Eric, came down to the calls, and the officiating in this game has really gotten all the attention, especially what happened late in this game. So a lot to unpack here. So watching this game and the fact that all year the Rockets have been able to get the calls, closing out the space that the defenders have on the three-point shooters, that the Rockets have been able to draw fouls, draw that contact, get to the line at a record clip. But they didn't really get those calls on Sunday, and it got magnified late in that game as Harden shot a three late. Draymond Green closed out. Harden kind of kicked the legs out, hit the floor. No call in that game. And then it led to a Chris Paul bumping an official and an ejection. So before we get to that, what's your thoughts on these calls, no calls, on the defenders closing out the space on the shooters? And we saw it on both sides. We saw it happen to Steph as well as Harden.
Well, before I answer that, I want to just say this is going to be a fantastic series, because what you saw in this game was, in fact, a Warriors team that came out hot. They're at home. They go up 9 points, I believe it was, in the first quarter on the Rockets. So a huge swing, just like we talked about with Sixers and Raptors. But the difference in this series is that the Rockets come out and cover that 9-point swing of their own in the second quarter. Then in the third, the Warriors 7-point swing in their favor. So you have these big swings back and forth. I think that's what's going to make this series really exciting, because both of these teams can score in buckets full, and you're going to see a lot of offensive firepower, and it can swing both ways even throughout the course of a game. So I think from game to game, what's going to be great about this series is you really can't necessarily say, oh, well, the Warriors at home, they should win these games. No, I mean, Rockets were right there this whole time, back and forth, and you're going to see that the whole time. Rockets could very well come out in game two and still win game two in Oracle, heading back to Houston 1-1. I think that's completely possible. But to your point about the refereeing, the thing that bothers me is that The referees seem to have a sliding scale. I understand in the playoffs, you want to let these guys play it out. You want to make the basketball games decided on the floor with the players' abilities rather than the referees' whistles. I understand that completely. However, when you train these guys how to play for 82 games throughout the season, and then you call the game differently throughout the playoffs,